Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. Speaking of big games, this week marks the release of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. This is the first all-new 2D Zelda game since 2015's Triforce Heroes, but we don't really talk about that one. Joining me for this episode is a man who has played through Echoes of Wisdom. It's Digital Trends senior gaming editor, Giovanni Colantonio. Gio, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat about Zelda. Always a good time. Always a cause for celebration. And ready to get into it.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we've actually chatted. I think it was right before Summer Game Fest. We were out at in LA. We were going to a Call of Duty event.
That's right. Yeah, hung out, went to the mall. It was great.
We went to the mall because there wasn't anything else in that area.
Yeah.
So we went to the mall. We got some food court food.
Yes. Oh, fond memories. a classic Summer Game Fest time. That was a fun little trip. That was a great mall. Let's be honest. That was a great mall.
It was a good mall. Yeah. I bought a pair of shoes.
I was there for that. That was a really cool sight to behold.
And we asked the developers of Call of Duty, because we got to tag team an interview. We got to kind of ask them if they're going to go for the ultimate shock value in Black Ops 6, and they danced around it pretty expertly.
They did not say no. So just if something horrible happens in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, Brian knew it first and tried to get the scoop on it.
I was like Raven Simone, and That's So Raven. I knew what was about to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we'll revisit this once the game is out and we've all played the campaign, but maybe on All Things Gamers, since that's the multi-platform podcast that I do. But Gio, we have a tradition on All Things Nintendo. When anybody makes their debut on the show, we get to know them a little bit through the lens of their history with Nintendo. So 2 questions I'm going to ask you. The first one is, what was your first Nintendo game? It could be first Nintendo memory. It can be your first game that you ever bought, first game you ever played, however you want to interpret it.
Man, I thought long and hard about this because I was like, how could one possibly know that, right? It's like one of those things that's so fundamental. But I actually think I do remember when I was a kid in school, I went to like a before school program, when like your parents have to drop you off early. So they drop you and, you hang out in the cafeteria before school starts. And I remember they had an NES. And I think that was maybe my first exposure to Nintendo, but also probably to video games. I don't know if I was like playing stuff before then. And I really specifically remember, and I don't know how, I must have been like second grade or something. It was very early. But I remember 3 games. One was they had like a version of Breakout that I played a bunch and really liked. 2 was Track and Field for the NES.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, just really specifically, I remember they had Track and Field. But the one that I loved, and I think it was my first like proper Nintendo game, was Excite Bike.
Oh, that's a good one.
So much Excite Bike at the before school program, just like fell in love with it. Like a weird first Nintendo game because it's not Mario or any of the series that are Nintendo's big series. But I've long been like in the corner of Excite Bike as like one of Nintendo's best games still. Even going back and playing it recently in a Nintendo World Championships, that collection that came out, I was like, man, this is so good. They could have such a good dirt bike racing game series if they wanted to, and they just don't want to, and it makes me so sad.
Now, did you ever get into like the Trials games? Because I feel like those are like the spiritual successors of Excite Bike.
A little bit, yeah, and I do like that they're kind of carrying the torch. Just that sort of like, you have to keep the physics of your bike in mind is a really fun hook. But I should get into them more because I feel like I keep holding out hope that maybe Excite Bike will return one day, and I won't need to play an alternative to it. But I think at this point, firmly, it will never come back unless we get like Excite Bike 99, which could be a thing that happens knowing Nintendo.
I mean, all their neglected franchises are just going to that, and also Mario for some reason. But that was here and gone in like 5 months or whatever it was.
What a strange one to get rid of out of all of them. It's like you're arguably the most like popular name recognition one. Do you remember Excite Truck when they tried to do that? That was a game that they did.
It sure was. That brings us to the second part of this, which is, what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time? It's a little bit more straightforward.
Yes, and I have a very straightforward answer for it because it is my favorite game of all time, period, which is Metroid Prime. I love Metroid Prime. it's always been one of my favorite games of all time. Playing the remaster of it, what was it? Last year, I think it
I think it
was.
was last year.
Time is crazy. Playing the remaster of it last year, I was really just like it solidified it for me. Just the atmosphere of it's such a phenomenal tone piece. The music in it is, I think, the best video game soundtrack ever, and I could go on and on about like how music functions as a character in that game. It's kind of
Mhm.
like the only other character other than Samus, and it communicates so much about the story without you needing to scan the optional lore. You kind of get like something's wrong here, and I kind of understand the beats of each area that I need to understand. It's just like a phenomenal piece of kind of like how can we make a game that communicates narrative and all of these things, but is like entirely focused on play and on gameplay, and we don't need to kind of be cinematic and do all this stuff that a lot of modern games do. Like it accomplishes it all, you know, through play. It's fantastic. I love that game a lot. I'm a big Metroid guy in general.
Yeah, Metroid Prime Remastered is unironically one of the best games on Switch, which is
Yeah,
crazy because it's such a great catalog of games on the platform.
yeah, it's unbelievable, and I mean it's such a cheat code, right? With remasters, because it's like, well, obviously, like one of the great GameCube games of all time will also be one of the great. Like it's like uh, Paper Mario: Thousand Year Door this year, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, obviously that's one of the best games on Switch as well. But genuinely, like without caveats, without like, oh, Metroid Prime Remastered, it's fantastic. It's a GameCube game, so just keep that in mind. It just holds up like a modern game. It's so fantastic.
The
The control.
textures that they did and
Oh
like
yeah,
the control updates that they gave you, it makes you feel like a game that could have come out last year instead of like a game that came out 20 years ago.
yeah, and I feel like there's few games that really nail that, especially in remasters. Like you get something from the GameCube era, and you're like, oh right, this part of the game. Ooh, that's
Mhm.
not fun. But that one, I feel like just every second of it, you're like, how have they not just been doing this series for since Metroid Prime 3? Like what a perfect gameplay hook they found for it. But hey, next year, I guess finally, fingers crossed, we're coming
Yeah,
back.
what's your outlook for that one?
I have a good outlook for it. I think them having the wherewithal to cancel the original version of it when they kind of felt that it was not going well, and to hand it back to Retro Studios
Mhm.
um, is a really encouraging sign. I think it would have been way more discouraging if like it had been a bunch of delays. They kept the same developer. They were like, oh, we're kind of retinkering it. That to me shows that they have a commitment to it being good. I also get the feeling that the purpose of something like Metroid Prime Remastered is to get a studio that has a lot of new people who maybe weren't involved in the original Metroid Prime games to be able to reverse engineer that game and figure out how it worked. I always see remasters as like a little bit of that, right? We're kind of like, let's learn how to make a Metroid game. Um, and so I get the feeling that like the team that's there is now very intimately familiar over the last couple of years with how to make a Metroid Prime game by remaking one of the best, or the best one. So I think I'm very positive on it. Uh, but I don't know. It's complicated too, because if you'd asked me this like a couple years ago, I would have been like, oh, we need Metroid Prime 4. After Metroid Dread, I was like, I almost don't need Prime 4. Like that game was just so fantastic that I'm like, oh cool, this kind of filled the gap that I needed for a new Metroid game. But no, I'm fingers crossed. You never know with a game that's been delayed this much, but I think they took the right steps to fix it. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
And to
Yeah.
your point also, like they had the wherewithal to not only, hand it to a different developer because the original developer wasn't going in the direction they wanted or delivering the quality that they wanted, but they didn't just be like, "Hey, fix what this other studio did." They said, "No,
Yes.
we're just throwing that all in the trash and you guys start anew," which is why it's taken so long.
Yeah, and I know people have been so kind of like feral about that, right? They've been so like mad about the fact that it's been delayed so long. But it's I agree. It's just the right call. You don't pick up somebody else's work and try to like, oh, we don't really believe in what they were doing, but we're gonna kind of fix it from the inside out. Like you really do have to start it from scratch. And the fact that they didn't cancel it outright, and say like, oh, we're just not doing this game, uh, shows that I think Nintendo is serious about making that game good.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, my hope is that it'll be the last great Switch game if it comes out on Switch and not Switch 2. But still to be seen, I suppose.
Yeah. But we do still have some games this year to look forward
Yes.
to. One of which, speaking of last great Switch games,
Mhm.
Super Mario Party Jamboree, Geo.
Oh, yes. Oh, finally someone says it. Everyone's been talking about Zelda, everyone's been talking about Mario and Luigi. Now it's Jamboree. That's the killer app of this holiday season, folks. Did you demo it at PAX or anything
I did
recently?
not. No, I did not get
Okay.
to make it to PAX this year, and unfortunately, we were not able to talk about it. I'm assuming you got to play it at some point.
Yeah, yeah, I played it recently. And it's really fun. I mean, I feel like Mario Party is one of those franchises where I'm always like, I play one and I'm like, okay, I'm done. I don't really need to play another Mario Party game. And then, like, as soon as I get back in with a bunch of people who are being competitive, I'm like, oh god, this it feels so good to yell at people and to be cocky and brash. And it hit, it really hit. The mini games that I played all seemed fairly simple so far. They were all
Okay.
kind of like, this is expected. Like, this is a mini game that would be in Mario Party. But it's cool. There's a lot of neat side modes that they're doing for that I'm curious to see how they play out. There's a whole like battle royale racing mini game where you're completing mini games and running around a map that's wild and it has like 20 players at once or something like that. There's a whole Bowser kaiju action mode that's very strange and I feels like one that's going to get forgotten to time, but it's cool that they're doing it. Yeah, curious to see how that one shakes out, but that's the big one. That's going to be the game. That's it. Assassin's Creed is out. It's just Jamboree is in. That's the big
But
one.
yeah, so the reason I bring it up is we got that overview trailer on Nintendo's YouTube channel,
Yes.
and just kind of gave us like the rundown. You gave us some of this stuff, but 5 new boards, 2 classic boards. So we're getting Western Land from Mario Party 2 and Mario's Rainbow Castle from Mario Party 1. And if you win a special mini game on the board, you can earn a Jamboree Buddy,
Okay,
which
that's news to me.
lets you perform special tasks like copying an opponent's item, or it can launch you across to the other side of the board. There's also local and online play, more than 110 mini games, they say. But here's what I was afraid of.
Okay.
Did you play the original Super Mario Party on Switch?
I did, yes.
I maintain that is the weaker of the 2 Switch Mario parties. But
100%.
again, it's kind of cheating because Mario Party Superstars is like a greatest hits compilation.
Yeah.
But I didn't like the implementation of the Joy-Cons. Like, it was just like too, like, you have to use the Joy-Cons and it has to be used in this way.
Yeah. So I actually have, I guess, some details on that from the preview. According to the preview that I kind of went to, they said that there were about like 16 motion controlled mini games of the
Oh.
110. So it's not actually that many, supposedly. I believe that was the number. I guess don't quote me on that exactly, but I believe they said it was actually not that many. And there is an option, I guess, in the game to just turn off motion controls to say don't put
Hmm.
in any of these mini games. I assume that is a consideration for Switch Lite. I feel like that's why a lot of Switch games don't have motion controls anymore. As soon as they did that console, it was like, oh, whoops, we can't really do this. But
It's like
from
when
what
they
I
released the
understand,
2DS and they were like, oh, well, we can't make gameplay reliant on 3D.
yeah, whoops, we messed up. Yeah, that's a weird thing that Nintendo loves to do with their own gimmicks. But yeah, supposedly it's pretty non-invasive. I only played like I think 1 or 2 mini games when I demoed it, and they were exactly what you would expect, just pretty fairly standard waggle control mini games. But yeah, it sounds like they've kind of built the game to be like that's here, but you can ignore it. It's not that much. And I guess with like 110 mini games, if only 16 of them are, motion controlled, that still leaves a pretty sizable chunk if you want to turn it off.
Hmm.
But yeah, I feel that I have nostalgia for motion controls though. I have like a weird waggle control nostalgia right now. I used to hate it. And then I think it was like the WarioWare game last year and like Switch Sports. I was like, I kind of like moving. I like moving my body. I miss kind of moving my body. I don't do that
You
anymore.
can do that without a Switch.
No. I think I can only do it by if I'm waggling a controller. I'm not. You want me to go outside? I'm going to exercise? Oh my god.
Or you can just get Ring Fit Adventure.
I do. I did that for a while. That was a big pandemic thing. Got back into it for sure.
But also, you're in luck because there are motion control specific modes in Mario Party Jamboree. There's Paratroopa Flight School, which
Okay.
you basically hold the Joy Cons in each hand and you flap your wings like a weirdo in your living room. And
Perfect. Flappy
there's
Bird is back. We're so back.
so it's available single player or two-player co-op or two-player competitive.
Ooh, oh,
So
competitive. Oh my god.
something to look forward to there. And
Oh,
there's some other modes. There's Toad's Item Factory, where everybody holds a little, like, holds their Joy-Con, and they have to like control different parts of a machine to get a ball to the goal. Like
sure,
there was one where
sure.
they were like pushing it up, and it was like launching the ball up in the air. And there's other ones where they rotate the platform and all kinds of different things you can do. That one has 30 stages that get increasingly more complicated and difficult.
Huh.
There's Rhythm Kitchen, which looks like Fruit Ninja, but to a beat. So like you basically perform different motion control tasks to the beat, and then you all work together to create different food dishes. So
Okay.
why not?
Cool.
And then
This
there's
sounds
online party
great.
modes.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
Coupathlon, with
Coupathon.
various mini games where you just have to cross the finish line first. And then there's the Bowser Kaboom Squad that you had
Yes.
talked about, where there's 8 players who join forces to attack. They keep calling him Imposter Bowser, which I don't know what.
That's so Nintendo. Like we can't call him Bowser.
We
He's in the
can't just
game. He's
kill Bowser.
you can't. It is wild that we've gotten to that point of him being such a character that it's like, well, he can't defeat Bowser. Bowser's kind of a good guy if we want him to be. It's like,
We
no, you
simply
can't.
cannot kill Bowser.
Yeah, this evil Bowser, he's an imposter. We can't. The regular Bowser's a good guy now. He has
We've
a
come a long
son.
way from Mario 64 of throwing him up against bombs and calling him terrible names.
Yeah, absolutely. He no more. He's turned a new leaf. He's doing the parental control videos for Switch now. You can't have him be a bad guy. That's who dads are supposed to relate to.
Yeah, he's the new role model for dads.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you are blasting cannons at him. 8-player co-op mini games, and then yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what Bowser Kaboom Squad is, but it's imposter Bowser. So don't get too excited.
Yeah, you don't get to kill real Bowser. I also did not know about this kitchen mode, and oh, now we're talking. That's really game of the year potential
Now
now.
we're
Yeah.
cooking.
Ooh,
Ugh. Well, Super
boy.
Mario Party Jamboree arrives on Nintendo Switch on October 17th. I will definitely be checking that one out.
Me too.
I'm definitely in the mood for a new Mario Party game, especially as you mentioned, its prime competitor, Assassin's Creed Shadows, has moved out of that space.
Yes, yeah, I've really cleared the field for it. It's all good. The only thing I'm hoping though is, man, my one wish for the next Nintendo console is just release one Mario Party game and update it. Just do a live service Mario Party game
Platform.
where you add more. Just do it. Like, I don't make me buy 3 Mario Party games that have 5 boards each. Like, get real.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating that, like, it's like, oh wow, we have like the ultimate Mario Party compilation and Mario Party Superstars,
Yeah.
and now we're gonna have all these other games that like just don't interact at all. It's like when Guitar Hero wasn't letting you import your songs, but Rock Band
Right.
was, and it's like, but why can't you guys do this?
Yeah, just they or at least like give me like Jackbox did that thing where they have like the Jackbox Mega Picker where it's like a launcher where you can launch the things. Like give me some easy way to launch into like I mean they're all the same game, right? Just like let me launch into a board. I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm looking forward to that. It seems like Mario, or not Mario, Nintendo has finally
Yes.
figured out how to make these games again, because
Yes.
they've really lost their way in like the Wii and Wii U era.
That was rough. And also like there was that 3DS one that was like the top 100 mini games that was like just mini games. That was like a
Hmm.
weird spin-off.
It was the
Yeah, they're
predecessor to
back.
Superstars.
Yeah, basically. It was like, what if we made Superstars bad? It's like, oh wait, maybe we should make it good. Great call.
So Gio, we got a Sonic Central stream. It didn't
We
have a
did.
ton of news that relates to the world of Nintendo, but we got a few pieces here. So
Yeah.
I would say the biggest news was the new Lego set that
Of course.
was teased, and it was Shadow and the Bio Lizard from Sonic Adventure 2. So that's fun.
Yeah.
We also got a new Sonic X Shadow Generations trailer that just it hit on some of the story beats. So that's always exciting. Good to
Yeah.
see Maria. Uh, you know, before
Alive and well.
tragedy strikes.
Yeah.
uh, the biggest news though didn't come from Sonic Central.
Right.
It came from a PlayStation State of Play on that exact same day. What a
Bizarre.
strange thing. But
So
we
bizarre.
learned that when December rolls around and the Sonic 3 movie hits theaters, we will be getting Sonic X Shadow Generations DLC that not only gives us the Shadow movie skin in the game, which is cool enough,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
also seemingly stages inspired by the movie. And Keanu is voicing Shadow during the levels.
Wild. I don't know how this wasn't in the Sonic Central stream, because I was watching the Sonic Central stream and I was like, it's weird that there's no major news here. You would think that there's some like cool reveal here, and then like the state of play came up and I was like, did they forget that they were doing Sonic Central and they farmed out the good news to Sony, and then we're like, oh wait, oh, we forgot that was supposed to be for our stream. Completely bizarre, but I'm psyched about that. Look, that game sounds great. I never played the original Sonic Generations.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've always heard that it's one of the best ones. And from what I've heard, from when that demoed at Summer Game Fest this year, those shadow stages are supposedly very cool.
They are.
That's really exciting. Yeah, did you get to play at Summer Game Fest?
I did. I got to play a good chunk of it, and I played Green Hill Zone as both classic and modern Sonic,
Yeah.
and it feels amazing. It's running at 60 frames per second, which is like definitely what Sonic needs to be. Like
Yes.
in hindsight, like he always should have been 60 frames per second, but like
Yeah.
back in Xbox 360, we didn't know any better. So we're just like,
Yeah,
oh
of
yeah,
course.
Sonic at 30 frames per second or whatever he was hitting at that point. Whatever, that's fine. But now it's like, oh my God, how did I ever play a Sonic game without 60 frames per second? So that plays fantastic, and it's one of the better modern Sonic games. And then you get to the Shadow stuff, which is all new. It's a completely separate, all new campaign.
Yeah.
And it's just like a lot of his classic levels, but they're also like there's something going on where like one of the characters from his past is like kind of warping the world around him. So like you'll just be running through one of his classic stages, and then suddenly the Doom's Eye, which is Black Doom from Shadow the Hedgehog,
Beautiful.
he appears, and then suddenly it's like Shadow's suddenly tripping because like the entire world is like Doctor Stranging around him, and
Yes.
it's very cool because then like the gameplay all changes. He also has like powers that he didn't have in the original games. He can like there's one that's like almost like a Spider-Man type swing. There's another one that's like he can grow wings and fly. I think they're level specific. He can do chaos control where like missiles are getting shot at you and you can
Yes.
freeze them in place and then use them as steps to like get up to the next level.
Love
Very
that.
cool stuff. And then the hub world, rather than being kind of like you didn't play the original Sonic Generations. And the original Sonic Generations, Sonic runs from left to right in like this white space
Mhm.
almost. And there's the different levels, and like it's like, oh, here's Green Hill Zone, here's Chemical Plant Zone, here's Sky Sanctuary. You just keep going right. The further right you go, the more modern it is.
Sure.
And for Shadow Generations, though, it's almost like they're doing Bowser's Fury style, where it's a big open area. It's inspired by the gameplay of Frontiers, like the open zone areas,
Mhm.
but they are doing it in a way that's like to capitalize on Shadow's like his powers that he has. Like he can like surf across the water, or he can like grapple up to a next level and everything. So they're doing some really cool stuff with the Shadow Generations portion of it, and it's more than just like, oh, we put Shadow in Sonic Generations.
Yeah, I love to hear the Bowser's Fury call out there, because I mean that game is like the gold standard for me of like,
Mhm.
if you're gonna do a little side game, in your re-release, like make it as good as Bowser's Fury. That's like as good as a lot of 3D Mario games to
It's
me.
so good.
It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
I wish more people would play it because like I feel
Yeah.
like people were deterred because it's just included as like a side game to a Wii U game that came out like what 10 years prior.
Yeah, but it's like it's such a concise game. Like there's no fat on it. It's just such a good vision of, hey, a Mario game where you kind of like have all of your levels laid out in an open world is so well done. I wish they had done like a, hey, you can buy it separately,
I was
if you
just
if you
thinking
didn't want to
that.
buy it. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I
like put
feel
it
like
out there
people
for like
would have done that.
$30 or something. I think
Yeah,
that's a good value. People would pick it up. Like if they haven't already bought Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, they're
yeah,
probably not going to unless it's on like some crazy mega sale, which is not going to happen because it's a Nintendo game.
yeah.
So like they just broke that out and let people. But I guess I don't know. Like Nintendo's probably not going to want to do that.
Yeah, of course. You don't want to you don't want to devalue Mario 3D World, I suppose.
Yeah,
But
but that game
but
rules
really,
too.
yeah. Also, that was, man. When I revisited that one, I was like, this game is way better than I remember. It's
It's
fantastic.
so good.
Yeah.
I've long been a defender of Mario 3D World, and like this version was even better because it performance boost. They
Yeah.
made the characters a little bit faster, so they
Mm.
played a little bit better within the levels. I think there was like one other, well, I mean, online play,
Online play is good.
which was
Also,
huge.
I've just forgot about the double cherry ability in that game.
Oh
Fantastic. What
yeah,
a great Mario power up. Cloning the guy. Genius. Love it.
yeah. We have one Mario, but what if we had four?
Yeah, what if there were what was that old GameCube tech demo like Mario
Super,
126?
yeah, Mario 128. Yeah,
128. Yeah, they should have done that. We should bring back Mario 128. It's
yes.
time.
Put that on Nintendo Switch Online.
There we go. There we go.
We got Star Fox 2.
That's true. That's true. There's hope one day that we may get Mario 128.
The difference is they actually finished Star Fox 2 before they canceled it. So I don't think they ever really came anywhere close to finishing Mario 128.
I know. Wasn't there also like I read about recently that there was like a canceled Mario volleyball game at some point that
Oh
I
yeah, just
read
turn into
about.
Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's what happened.
No, I don't know anything about that actually. The
I,
volleyball.
I can't remember the name of it. I looked it up recently, and like there was a whole canceled Mario volleyball game
Huh.
supposedly that looked wild. Sad. We
I'm
never
sure
got
it's
it.
just on Did You Know Gaming, and I'll be able to like read that or watch the entire video and like know
I'm
everything there is to know because those guys do great work.
absolutely.
Um, but the getting back to Sonic X Shadow
Yes.
Generations, the Keanu Reeves pack, we'll call it, even though it's called a movie 3 pack or something. It arrives on December 12th, and it's included in the digital deluxe version of the game. The game itself comes out October 25th. I will definitely be playing that because I love Sonic Generations when it came out, and now it's even better.
Yeah, I'm psyched about it. I'm psyched about for my first time playing Sonic Generations, and I love me Shadow the Hedgehog. I'm a sucker for Shadow the Hedgehog.
So you're probably pretty excited about the movie.
Man, here's the thing: the first two Sonic movies, I didn't even really love that much. Like, I liked them. I thought they were okay. I have problems with like the human stories in them. I think they're a
Oh, I
little
think
like,
everybody does.
yeah, they just like suck a lot of airtime out of it. But I remember when I saw Sonic 2 in theaters, didn't know anything about it, like hadn't seen any spoilers for it. Was sitting in the theater, the post-credit stinger comes on where they reveal Shadow, and I guffawed, just like the largest like that I've ever put out in my life in the theater. It like echoed through the theater, just such a guttural reaction. And I remember like when I was watching the movie, like as the credits were coming up, I was like, I don't know, that was okay. Like I like Tails Knit. I like anytime we're with those characters. I just like I'm so sick of the human stuff. I don't know if I like this series. And as soon as that happened, I was like, I'm going to see this at midnight. I'll see the third one at midnight. I haven't done that for a movie in decades or whatever. I'm going to do it.
So I had a different experience watching Sonic 2 in theaters. So one, I will say they're going in the right direction, I think.
Yes.
Like the first one was so human focused. The
Yeah.
second one, it's like, hey, what if we sent the humans away on like a reason to not be with the characters?
Yeah.
And then like they still had to like pay them a little bit of service, but it's like, yeah, we're gonna focus primarily on that. Like this seems like they might be killing the humans
That would
in the
rule.
trailer. Like it looks like James Marsden might be getting killed in like a scene that they show.
That's beautiful. That's what they should do. They should really go all out, up the stakes. They don't like I know people like kind of like some of the human stuff, so if that's your bag, cool. But like the whole Sonic 2 like wedding plot line, where it's like, oh, this guy's feeling like emasculated by this other guy, and there's a bridezilla story. I was just like, why are we doing this? We have like who is it? Emily O'Shaughnessy, who
Colleen O'Shaughnessy.
Colleen O'Shaughnessy. I think Emily O'Shaughnessy might be someone I went to high school with. Colleen
Shout
O'Shaughnessy.
out Emily O'Shaughnessy.
Yeah, sorry if you're a listener. Like so delightful, like every time I'm in that space with her doing the Tails voice, I'm like, this is fantastic. And then every time I'm like watching men play volleyball on the beach or whatever happens in that movie, I'm like, please let me go back, please.
Yeah, I mean that was always like the worst part of that movie is when they're like, "Oh, we got to like make sure people remember that these human characters exist in this universe too." It's like, "But I was having so much fun with the computer generated characters."
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, they're a delight. God, they do them so well.
yeah.
I have high hopes for the third one. I feel like they're finally going to kind of nail it in that. Just, I mean, it has Shadow the Hedgehog voiced by Keanu Reeves. That kind of makes it kind of makes it the best one already, just on
Yeah.
paper. So
So I
yeah, we'll
saw
see.
it in a pre-release capacity. I went to an early screening because
Mm,
I took part in the um the junket with some
yeah,
of the actors. So I got to interview Ben Schwartz, James Marston, and Colleen O'Shaughnessy, as well as Jeff Fowler, the director.
right.
And so they wanted me to see the movie beforehand, which makes sense. So they set me up with a screener, and our former editor in chief Andrew Reiner came with me,
Mm,
and we were watching it, and the Shadow Stinger came on because, like, we're like, oh, that was pretty good, and then
yeah.
the Shadow Stinger came on, and we both looked at each other, and went, whoa. We're just alone in there with like this person. I'm assuming they worked for like Paramount or something. They had to fly out to Minneapolis just to show us this movie.
That's
That's
that's the right reaction. Just like, whoa. That's beautiful. Oh my god. That's god. I wish I could have been in a crowded theater for that. I usually like hate doing at this point in my life the sort of like opening night with a bunch of fans. Like I just the like yelling at every Easter egg. I'm kind of like, ugh, whatever. I don't want to do this. But I think Sonic 3 might be the one where like I think I want to be in the big crowd for
Yeah.
that.
There are some events that you're like, I want to be with like the most hyped people possible. Like, I went to the absolute first showing that you could go to for like Avengers Infinity War
Yeah.
and like Spider-Man No Way Home. Like things like
Sure,
that.
yeah.
Like I want to be in like I made a crucial mistake trying to follow that as like my guidelines a couple weekends ago.
Mm,
So there were a bunch of concerts happening the same weekend in Minneapolis. It was
mm,
weird. Like the first night was Metallica, and I was like, okay, I'm
mm.
gonna go see them. So I went and saw
Yeah.
Metallica with Pantera and
Ooh,
Mammoth WVH, and
cool.
great show, amazing
Yeah.
show. Everybody was hyped. Then the next night, I had a choice to make, and I chose poorly.
Okay.
So Green Day and the Smashing Pumpkins were playing at the baseball field here in town,
Right.
and then there was also a show that was down at the casino,
Okay.
and it was Creed with Three Doors Down. And I said, Green Day and the Smashing Pumpkins is unequivocally going to be the better show.
Right, of course.
But I bet that crowd is going to be so in it in the Creed show. So that's what I chose. And they were, but it was like in the worst way possible. It was like in like
Yeah.
the frat boy kind of way they were into it. Like they had like the dudes had like the collections of like their beer cans they had consumed like on the bills of their hats, and then like they were stacking them into like a pyramid, like a monument to Scott Stapp. And I was just standing there like stone cold sober watching Creed, and I was just like, man, this sucks.
Required reading for your listeners, I suppose. Luke Winkie over at I believe Luke's at Slate. I can't remember. Did a piece where he went on the crude cruise. Sorry, the Creed cruise, which is a thing that happens every year. Is Creed does a cruise, and Luke Winkie like went out to that and did a whole like wild report about the experience of that, and it is worth a read. I believe it's over at Slate. It's fantastic. But
to
I
to their
I
credit, they sounded good. Like
I'm sure, yeah,
they sounded like they do on their albums, and like Mark Tremonti is a fantastic guitarist, and Scott Stapp sounded like he did back in like 1999. So
yeah.
yeah, good for them.
Yeah, sometimes you got to go to a show like that. I remember the one concert. I had a couple of concerts that got canceled because of COVID in 2020. The one that killed me is I was gonna go see Korn, just kind of as like a bit. I was gonna go see Korn. I was like, you know what? I bet it would be funny to see the band Korn. I think Faith No More was co-headlining with them, which is like a band that I actually
Oh,
like. So I was like,
that would be awesome.
yeah, yeah, like I love Mike Patton and Faith No More. So I was like, oh, I'll, that's a good reason to go. But like secretly in my head, I was like, this is an excuse for me to go see Korn and not feel like I've made a bad decision. And then it got canceled because of COVID, and then they like
Uh,
rescheduled it, and Faith No More wasn't on the bill, and I was like, I'm absolutely not going to that. I can't. I've
yeah,
learned my lesson.
my canceled. I had two canceled COVID shows. The first
Mm.
one was the Silver Sun Pickups. I was literally supposed to see
Oh.
them like a week after COVID hit, and they're just like outright like, no, we're canceling this. Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody's getting refunded. The other one I was supposed to see was Rage Against the Machine with Run the Jewels.
Oh god, that would have ruled. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sad.
So they
Ugh.
postponed it twice. They're like, okay, yeah, it was supposed to be July 2020. We're gonna do July 2021, and then
Whoops.
July 2021 came around, and they're like, okay, well, it's gonna be like July 2022, and then like Zach De La Rocha just like he like broke his foot or something like that, and was like, okay, we're just outright canceling it now. I'm like, God,
That's
I
cursed.
waited for so long, and
Oh,
yeah, it was absolutely cursed.
that's so sad. Yeah, the other
So
one I missed, I think, was I was gonna see Alanis Morissette with, like, Garbage
garbage,
and Liz
yeah,
Phair opening, yeah, and I was like, "Ah, that would've been a fun '90s show," but it
that would have
took
been a
it
really good show.
the pandemic took a lot of shows from us.
It took so much.
It took so
We
much.
still have not been made whole.
Yeah.
Uh, we were talking about the state of play, and they gave us on that stream a 2-pack of release dates that were revealed on that stream. So,
Yep.
Lego Horizon Adventures is coming out on November 14th.
Mhm.
I mean, surprisingly, that is coming to Switch as well. A Horizon game. I think it's basically like a Lego remake of a retelling of the first game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I believe it follows the story very loosely and
Yeah,
jokingly.
as the Star Wars Lego
Yeah,
games do, where just oh
exactly.
yeah, here's what Han Solo was doing when he was I don't know what he was doing.
Just hanging out.
Yeah, he's hanging out.
Before he shot that
He's
guy.
being a bro.
Yeah.
Uh, Fantasia Neo Dimension coming out
Ooh.
December 5th. Based on your reaction, I'm assuming that's the one of these two you're more excited for.
Look, I'm excited for both of them. I liked what I've demoed of Lego Horizon so far. It was very cute. But I'm the Apple Arcade subscriber. I'm the one Apple Arcade
Yeah, I am
subscriber in
too.
the world. Okay, cool. There's two of us. We're Legion. Um, did you play Fantasian on Apple Arcade?
I started it. I played like two
Okay.
hours, and I'm like, I'm gonna wait for this to come to console.
Yeah, yeah, it seemed inevitable even at that point. Uh, I think that game is phenomenal. Like, I really genuinely think a lot of people are always trying to like call games the modern Chrono Trigger, right? They're like, "Oh, Sea of Stars, this is like the modern Chrono Trigger." There was like an a game announced during an Xbox stream this morning, which is like an indie game inspired by Chrono Trigger. I can't remember the name of it. I wish I had it in front of me. But a lot of games like that are indebted to it. Fantasian to me is like the closest a game has come to capturing Chrono Trigger. And the problem with it when I played it on Apple Arcade was that like it had wild difficulty spikes that made it really hard to get through. And the one change that they're doing for the console version is like an easier difficulty mode. So
Oh,
like
good.
which thank God, because that game like 40 hours in just becomes like impossible. So I'm psyched about it. I'm also just excited like to have that hipster moment where like everybody in December is like, this is one of the best RPGs of the year. And I'm like, it was one of the best RPGs of 2020, actually. Like you all missed out. You don't get to call it one of the great RPGs now. I'm excited to be so insufferable about it. Like I gotta make my Apple Arcade subscription work for something. I'm doing the like I liked it before it was cool. I'm rolling the whole thing out.
Hey, it's been a good year for Apple Arcade games coming to consoles. Like we got
Yep.
TMNT Splintered Fate,
Yep.
Hello Kitty Island Adventures coming out next year.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like a
which is
lot of the
also
big
really good.
ones.
Yeah. Yeah, there's only a couple that are still trapped on there. Sega actually weirdly, there's a Sonic game
Oh yeah,
on
Sonic
there.
Dream
Sonic
Team.
really great game. Like my
It
favorite
is.
3D Sonic game. I really like it. That one's on there. There's like a full Puyo Puyo game like
Mhm.
on there that's legitimately very good. They'll come to Switch at some point,
Oh,
right? Next
Sonic Dream
year.
Team. That's another one of those ones where I started it up. I played like an hour or two, and I was like, "This will come to Switch at one point."
Yeah.
It's going to be a Sonic Central 2025 announcement. Mark
It'll
my
be
words.
it'll be a state of play announcement on the same day as the Sonic Central stream.
And
They'll
oddly
forget
enough,
to
it's
announce
just
it.
it's just going to be coming to Switch, but PlayStation's announcing it for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, we're just doing them a solid on this one.
Now, Gio, we talked about TMNT Splintered Fate, but
Yes.
we got some news of another TMNT game this week, and we're going to close out the news segment on this. One of my favorite retro revival games of all time, getting new DLC this week.
Yeah.
Shredder's Revenge, Radical Reptiles update. And here's the good news. It's only $4 for the premium
Yes.
version of this update, or you can just download the free version of the update. So first of all, shout out to Tee Lopes, who composed not only the soundtrack to Shredder's Revenge, not only the soundtrack to Sonic Mania, the Streets of Rage 4 DLC, Penny's Big Breakaway, but also the theme song to this very podcast. Shout out to Tee Lopes,
Ah,
friend of the show. But this update, the free version of the update, adds remixes of his soundtrack by other prominent game composers, including Anna Managuchi, Button Masher, Jake Kaufman, Keiji Yamagishi, and Tomoya Tomita. And then the premium edition, which is only $4, adds Mondo Gecko and Mona Lisa as playable characters.
ooh, that's a developer that gets the assignment when it comes to these retro revivals.
Hmm.
It's like they know exactly what they should be doing. Like what a pitch perfect project that is, and that I hadn't heard about the update or what was actually in the update yet. I know they were doing one, but that's you got Anamanaguchi on it. That's perfect. They know what they're doing.
Oh
They
yeah,
know exactly what they're doing. Full circle as well. I believe this is right. Shredder's Revenge, the Ninja Turtles theme song of it, is sung by Faith No More's Mike Patton,
it is in this
right?
version.
Yeah,
It absolutely
it's a
is.
great
Yeah, it's
version of
funny.
it.
My cousin is a big fan of like 90s rock the way I am, and
Yeah.
he sent me like a Ninja Turtles thing on Instagram the other day, and I was like, "You've played Shredder's Revenge, right?" And he's like, "No, I haven't." And I'm like, "Dude, Mike Patton sings the theme song," and I sent him like the reveal trailer, and he's like, "Okay,
Yes.
I'm buying this right now."
Oh my god. Voice of the darkness in the darkness, and one of Portal 2's end boss guys
He has such
or in
a
the first one.
great voice. Like
So good.
his performance in the darkness is so good. Like the darkness 2 specifically,
Yeah. It was
unbelievable.
he had like such a moment. It felt like he was gonna be like, he's gonna be a video game guy now, and then that kind of like came and went.
And then
That
he's
was it.
back with Shredder's Revenge, baby.
I know he's back. We're so back. They got to let him keep doing it.
But I'm excited for speaking of games like this for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind.
Yeah, is that a Digital Eclipse joint?
It
I can't
is.
remember. Digital Eclipse, man, they're another one that just like understands the assignment with like these
Oh
retro
yeah.
revivals. Like going so far beyond just like, okay, it's nostalgia, like, we're doing this because it looks like something that you used to like. They actually get like how to build these games, how to do them right, how to make them feel like standalone things that go beyond nostalgia. I God, Digital Eclipse, man, they're one of my favorite developers going right now. They're doing that Tetris collection that's coming out
Oh
soon
my
as
god,
well.
yeah.
Oh, come on,
If it's
let's go.
anything as good as Atari 50, which I have faith that it will be,
Yeah.
I mean, we're in the golden age of retro collections.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. Have you played much of their like Gold Master series, like Making of Karateka?
No,
And
I haven't. Atari 50 is the one I've spent the most time with.
I highly recommend Making of Karateka. That is like one of the coolest games I've played in the last couple of years. Just like the idea of an interactive documentary video game, and it actually works very well. That thing is incredibly cool.
Yeah, it's I mean that entire everything that studio puts out is fantastic these days.
Yeah.
And yeah, Power Rangers Rita's Rewind is coming out hopefully soon. I think
Yeah.
that's still slated for 2024, even though I don't think we have a date. And then they have what is it called? Tetris Forever? No,
Yes, that's the
isn't
Tetris
it?
one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so, right? Tetris Forever?
Tetris Forever might be something else.
Yeah,
Hold on.
there's a lot of Tetris games. It's hard to keep them straight. I feel like that's it.
Yes, it is Tetris
Okay.
Forever, Digital Eclipse. That's coming out next year, I believe.
Yeah, Game of the Year 2025. That's
Hey,
it. It's gonna be
I
it's gonna
mean,
be GTA 6.
and Assassin's Creed Shadows,
Yeah,
apparently.
Assassin's Creed Shadows, right?
But Gio, we're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we will be getting your review of The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. We will be right back. We are back, and whether you're a Nintendo-specific podcast or just a fan of video games, it is always a big occasion when a new Legend of Zelda game comes out. Gio, ever since the closure of Game Informer, I'm unable to receive early codes from Nintendo, so I am going to be relying pretty heavily on you for this one. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. It's out now on Nintendo Switch. This was a game that I don't think anybody expected to get announced earlier this year when they did announce it. We just got Tears of the Kingdom last year.
Right.
People are still riding high on that. It won several Game of the Years. It was that or Baldur's Gate 3, it seemed. So I think people were like expecting, okay, well, the Zelda franchise, they're going to take their victory lap. They're not going to really do much in the near term. And then we not only get like a new top-down Zelda, but it's an all-new game, and it's starring Zelda. So I guess talk me through your initial thoughts when you started playing this game and how those impressions evolved over the course of your playthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before I actually reviewed it, I did a preview for it. That was like the first 90 minutes or so of the game. So that was my first exposure to it. And like the first 90 minutes of this game sell the idea of what it is so well. And that was like my immediate thought, right? Was, oh, this idea works. Essentially, the twist is that it's traditional Zelda, but you can copy items and that turns it into this sort of like puzzle platformer on top of traditional Zelda. So, you have to uh, get over a large gap. And it's like, well, how can I do that? Okay, well, I can copy beds, so I can make a bridge of beds by stacking them on top of one another. And then, like, there's a boss fight early on in the first dungeon. It has traditional Zelda dungeons. And there's kind of a boss fight where you're fighting a sort of like Dark Link sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I remember in the demo for it having this moment where I like was like, how do I? He has a shield. I can't quite attack him because Zelda can't attack directly. She can only copy abilities. Um, and I had a moment where I kind of like summoned a moblin who was kind of like distracting him, and then I like summoned pots behind Link and tossed them at him, and I was like, "Oh, this is so cool! This is such a smart idea." Bringing the player agency of Tears of the Kingdom to a sort of like miniaturized version of it felt really smart. It reminded me of when you do shrines in Tears of the Kingdom, and like you can just totally solve things the wrong way, and like that's the joy of them. So really positive impressions from that preview. I think the first 90 minutes, especially when people play it and get through the first dungeon, they'll be hooked pretty fast. What I'll say though is that the full game, I don't think totally keeps that momentum up. I kind of think the best part of it is that introduction when you're learning everything very fast. I like Echoes of Wisdom. I think it's very fun. I you know definitely enjoy it. I think it's a great direction for the series. I think Grezzo, first of all, great developer. I really enjoy what they did with the Link's Awakening remake. I think they've hit on a really good look and feel for these top-down Zelda kind of revivals. It's great, and I think that they've got a great idea here. It's a smart idea. It's kind of almost like Scribble Nazi. It reminds me of a Scribble like Scribble Knots. I don't like the term Scribble Nazi
No,
actually at all. That sounded really terrible.
that came out
Uh,
very strange.
yeah, that's weird. You can't add a Y to that word. But yeah, like I really enjoy what they kind of hit on here with this idea. I just don't think it's fully realized yet, and I think that becomes more apparent the deeper that people are going to get into the game. I imagine that impressions will be very high immediately, and then cool a little bit. Um, there's a couple of issues that I have with it that I think will get smoothed over if they get a second crack at this idea. But the big one, I think, for me, and this is something that Ash Parrish over at The Verge hit on really well in the review there. Um, it's a puzzle game that doesn't actually have that many puzzles, which is
Mm.
weird. A lot of what you do in the game or have to solve in the game is, hey, there's a gap you have to cross, or there's a ledge you have to get up to. That's like 90% of the actual puzzles in the game. And unfortunately, there's really easy ways to solve both of those. Like getting up across or getting across a gap, like one of the first items you get in the game that you can clone basically does that every time. There's like a couple of other ways you could do it, but you could just do the thing that you know how to do as well. Same with getting up to a ledge. Like once you kind of figure out how to do it, there's not really a lot of reason to experiment. Like you've already solved the puzzle, right? There's an item you can get that's like a spider that climbs up the wall and you can grab onto it, and that just lets you traverse the entire world. Like you never need another traversal item
Mm.
other than that. So that's kind of where it starts to run into some problems. It de-incentivizes you to experiment in the first place because the UI that they have chosen for this game is so like obviously wrong that you're
Oh,
kind of like,
really?
so what they do
It,
is
it looks like the Tears of the Kingdom style interface, right?
it is right. So the idea is that you have your echoes and you can call up a menu that is a single horizontal bar of all of your echoes. There are over 100 echoes in the
Oh
video game,
no.
and when you are trying to find like where's this one critter that I want to bring in, and you have to scroll through by the end of the game 100 different echoes, obviously not a great way to do that.
Yeah.
There's no way to shortcut it. There's no like, oh, I'm going to put them on my D-pad so I have like the four that I use a lot. Um, but you can sort them by a couple of different things, like most recently learned. Um, but the one that you probably will use the most is most used. And
Yeah.
that kind of incentivizes you to just use the ones that are at the top of that list. So you kind of end up using like the same 15, like because you can summon enemies to fight other enemies. Those are sort of, you know, interchangeable. A lot of them are just like, here's another thing that attacks. There's not a ton of strategy to which one you choose. Just choose the one that's bigger. Um, so that is sort of the trouble with that system, I think. It's really fun. It's really easy to use. It has a couple of eureka moments where you're like, oh, I did something that's really smart. Um, but I think it also makes you realize that what's so good about Tears of the Kingdom and Ultra Hand and the systems in those games is that there's a lot of different puzzles, right? Like all of the shrines feel different. They have a different
Hmm.
challenge, and there's a totally different way to tackle them. And even the really small things, like I remember when I demoed it, the demo was really simple, right? For Tears of the Kingdom. I did you do the demo back in the day before it kind of came out, where they had you just do like a small snippet of that game?
For Tears of the Kingdom, yes.
Yes. So if you remember, like it was basically just like you get into a moblin cage, like a fenced off moblin cage, and then you go up to the sky and you bring a crystal back to a shrine, and
Yeah.
that was like the whole demo for it. And it was like it's like a really short snippet of the game, but I spent so long on it because you could do it in so many different ways. And I remember like the thing I ended up doing in Tears of the Kingdom was I like built a flying machine that had jets on it to try and fly into the Moblin base, but it set on fire immediately because I didn't realize that jets would burn the wood. So I like had to eject from it and glide. And as I'm gliding into the base, I see the kind of like device run out of battery and just careen into the space and blow up all the Moblins by accident. And I was like, what a great, weird, immersive sim puzzle. And that's what makes that game work. And I don't think they have enough tools in Echoes
Mm.
of Wisdom to accomplish those moments. It's all very simplified. It feels like it's a little bit more of a kid's game, which is great. I think like having a more streamlined, approachable version of Tears of the Kingdom that can on-ramp kids is a smart idea. It's almost like the game that should have come before Tears of the Kingdom and not after it, I think. But I do think that there's just a lot more room to grow with that system, just figuring out more puzzles that use the system, figuring out a better way to let people choose echoes that's not just a single line of 100 things. Um, and yeah, that's kind of like, I would say, the crux of my critique of it. I think it's going to be a little polarizing, isn't quite the right word, because I think that implies that there are going to be people who just don't like it, and I don't think that'll be the case. But I do think there were people who kind of feel a little lukewarm on it. And
Sure.
the deeper they get into it, I think it gets a little weaker as you go. So I think that's kind of my overall impression of it. Did you
Hmm.
have specific stuff that you were curious about with it? Because I got lots of thoughts on it.
Nope, that's it. Thanks for
Okay.
joining. No.
Okay, that's it. That's the whole game.
So, I mean, you talked about how it's kind of light on puzzles, but
Yeah.
couldn't you almost view, based on like the way combat works in this game, almost every combat encounter could be seen as like a puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of how that's kind of how it's treated, right? Where combat is almost a mini strategy game, right? Where you have a certain amount of pips, like energy pips, that denote how much you can summon, and your different summons cost a different amount of pips. So you need to say, okay, I have 4 pips of energy. I'm going to, get 3 snakes and a bat going, right? And that'll let me have a ground attack, but also an air attack, whatever. Um, and that part is really cool. And there were a couple of moments in the game where I mentioned the thing about kind of like using an enemy as a distraction and kind of
Hmm.
using a pot as a weapon from the back. There are little moments like that that I think are really cool. There's also like, I remember one of the first encounters that I did, even during the demo, was like Field of Moblins, a very classic, like Breath of the Wild, like moblin enclosure. You have to beat them and then the chest opens kind of situation. And I sent out a bunch of enemies, and I sent one that had like a fire, like a flame on its head, and it like set the grass on fire, and that like burned all of the enemies. And then I like dropped a piece of meat, and that distracted the enemies, and they were like running over to it because they were attracted to meat. But that also meant that all of my enemies that I summoned also ran over to the meat. So there are like combat puzzles to it. And certainly the boss fights have some traditional puzzle elements that I think are neat as well. But there's still just not that many like puzzles that I kind of found in combat. Like there were a couple, but for the most part, by the end of the game, it just makes sense to summon your strong moblin, like your tier 4 moblin that is like very powerful. That just kind of gets the job done in most fights, and there's not a lot of strategy for like, oh, I'm gonna, summon two of this enemy and one of this enemy because it'll interact in this way. Like they're kind of just swords. The exception to that is sort of like there's times to use airborne enemies and times to use grounded enemies. That's cool. There's one boss fight early on where it's kind of like a stone talus,
Mhm.
and it has like a weak spot that you have to hit. And the traditional way to do the fight, I guess, is like you pull the thing off with like Zelda has this yanking ability that you use throughout the game. And there's one phase of the fight where like it appears on its shoulder. And I think what you're supposed to do is wait for it to do like some sort of downward attack and then yank it. But you can send about a bunch of like bats and they'll actually attack it from above. And that's like a different way that you can solve that puzzle. And that's kind of cool. But those moments are really few and far between, I found. There's not actually too many moments to solve, like where it feels like I was having eureka moments in combat. Um, it also trivializes itself because Zelda gets a power early in the game that's basically Link form, where she, for a
Yeah.
limited amount of time, has a sword and, she unlocks other abilities. And that, they have, again, like a limited amount of energy that you can spend, so you can't use it all the time. But that ends up trivializing it because it's like, well, I'm just going to, in the fight where I need to do combat, and that's imperative, use sword fighter form. Um, and that's a running theme with the game for me too. Like there are a lot of things that it does that feel like this one thing trivializes everything in the game. Like there's all of these climbing puzzles, but you can just summon the spider that climbs up the wall and it'll take you there every single time. It's a whole game of moments like that where every time you find something cool, you then find the thing that just makes sense to do for the rest of the
Mhm.
game. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff happens pretty early. Um, so you find these like crucial tools early on, and then you're kind of just using them for most of the game. Um, but yeah, I mean, like there's some fun experimentation. There are cool moments, and I think especially for younger players, I think it'll feel a little more ingenious, when you're kind of playing around in that sandbox.
Yeah, were there any of those, like, unexpected, like, interactions between the echoes or the characters or anything? Like, you described, like, your bokoblins or moblins or whatever it was running over and grabbing the meat, and, like, you're like, "Oh, okay, I guess that doesn't work." But, like, were there anything that's, like, even close to some of the stuff that we would get with, like, the Tears of the Kingdom, like, unexpected interactions?
Not that I saw. Like it's weird because there's like over 100 items, but they all feel kind of limited, like in how they interact with each other and what they are. Like enemies ultimately all kind of feel like one of two enemies, right? They either fly or they don't, and that's what most of them feel like, and they don't really interact too much. Um, and also like there's like four versions of beds and four versions of pots, and they are all
Just like
functionally
in
the
real
same.
life.
Yeah, there's a lot of different beds. Like this is a really realistic game in that sense. Um, so not too much, but there are a couple of like cute ideas where when you crack them, you're like, oh, that's neat. The one I'll say is like, Zelda games always have like classic Zelda games, like you walk into the room where all the tiles come up and they fly at you. Like that's
Mhm.
the classic Zelda thing. You can copy one of those, and what you find is that when you summon it, it shoots off in a direction and you're like, okay, you can use that maybe to hit a switch, or you can use that to hit an enemy, or you can grab onto it with your kind of bind ability, and it has a power where you can follow the motion of anything you're attached to. So you follow its motion and that just lets you like sail over to another platform, and that's really cool. Moments like that where you kind of realize, oh, this one item maybe can be used in a couple of different ways. But that's kind of the best example of one that I found. Like that one's really cool. There's also like water blocks, which are very useful for platforming, but are another like they trivialize a lot of the game once you find them because they kind of do everything you need them to do. Um, but yeah, not a ton. I mean, again, like stuff like meat or fire. Using an armadillo to smash a bunch of boxes. They can roll forward and blow up a bunch of things. Um, you know, there's a little bit of play with items that can float. When you get to water, there are certain items that can float, and that's really useful for getting across areas. Um,
Sure.
but it's a little more limited than I was hoping based off the demo. I think, like,
Mm.
again, the first 90 minutes kind of sell 90% of what the game does. And then after that, it's sort of like a lot of these items are variations on other items, and you can use them because they're better or not.
What is the process like for acquiring these echoes? Is it like super linear? Is it like you get rewarded for exploration? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so the really good thing I'll say about it is that I think it's a really great open-ended game. Like, it feels like an open world game. They really let you loose in Hyrule early. It's a pretty big space. There are a lot of secrets in it, and there's a lot of stuff to find. And, like, finding echoes is really simple through all of that process, which is really great. Essentially, what happens is that in the world there will be certain objects that glow, right? They have like
Okay.
a shine to them, and those are objects that you can go up to and copy. They basically, you hit the right trigger, I believe, and you just instantly copy them. And once you copy them, you can summon them anytime you want. There's no restriction on how much you can copy stuff. The only restriction is that you have a certain amount of energy pips, so you can only have out summons, a certain amount of summons at a time. But you can just summon something, and like the first used one will go away. So there's no like, oh, you can only have three and then that's it. You can just keep summoning a stack of beds, and then summon a monster when you need it, and the first bed will go away, whatever. Um, every enemy that you fight can be copied. You have to beat them, and then a little like toy version of them shows up. You copy it, and then that is something that you get. But it's all really simple. It's all just kind of like a one button affair. You can hit the button again to take down the copy. You can hold the button to remove all of your copies that are out at once. All very simple, and that is like a huge credit to the game. It makes it really easy to experiment. It's a very streamlined process, other than the UI being a truly bizarre decision. You know, really easy to get into it, which I think is really important. I think you want players to have as little friction as possible with a system like this, and they do a
Hmm.
really good job at nailing that. Credit to the team on making a very accessible kind of or approachable version of it like that. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of ways to use it, right? There's so much world to use it on. There's so much to explore. Um, there's a lot of like hidden bosses. There's a lot of hidden areas. That's really fun to find. It doesn't feel linear. The flow of the game is that the first 90 minutes are linear, and then it opens up. There's like two dungeons you can kind of hit at once. You can choose. And then after you do those, there are like three dungeons that you can hit in any order. So it's almost a little bit of that like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Like, here are the four main missions that are in the corners of the map. Do them in any order. It has that same philosophy. I spent a lot of time just walking around the world doing nothing before I actually did any of those, and finding different echoes and whatnot, so I could experiment more in the dungeons. So yeah, it has all those same strengths, I would say, as Breath of the Wild in that sense. It's just a matter of the way the ecosystem fits into that doesn't exactly work. As well as there's a smoothie system,
Oh
which
yeah.
is, in my opinion, not good. And
Oh
I'm very mad
no.
about the smoothie.
I
This
thought
is
you were
one of those.
building up to something, and I was like, in my opinion, is the best part of this game. And I'm like, tell me all about the smoothie system. And now I'm worried.
This is one of those things where, like, I'm gonna say it, and people are gonna be like, "This is such a minor thing to complain about. Like, this is not a big deal, and you know it." Hear me out. Hear me out. I'll go through this as quick as I can because this is the longest rant that I could possibly give about this game. There is a cooking system in the game that is like Breath of the Wild's cooking system. You make smoothies. The difference is that it's much more streamlined. You don't have to get like five items together in a cooking pot. All you have to do is you go to a smoothie maker, which are these little dekus, and they make a smoothie for you, and you give them two ingredients. You mix two ingredients, and they make a smoothie. There's only a certain amount of ingredients. There's like 15 or something like that, right? And they're all very clear. Like, one's a pepper, so you know that if you mix the hot pepper with something, you get your cold resistance or whatever,
Hmm.
right? So it's very easy to know. Okay, if I put these two things together, I don't even really need to experiment to figure it out. I know what it's going to do for the most part. There's a little bit of experimenting, but there's not that many ingredients, so you figure it out very quick. Um, they really love this system a lot, so
Oh
much
no.
so that like every reward that you find in the world when you find a chest, 90% of the time it's smoothie ingredients. It's like you found
Oh.
10 apples, and you're like, okay, but you also just find apples out in the world when you break pots and things like that. So you're constantly finding ingredients. when you only are mixing 2 ingredients at a time, you're not using that many ingredients, so you end up with these, like, stacks and stacks and stacks of, like, apples and pumpkins that you do not need to use. You also can't hold that many smoothies at once. I think it's, like, 20 or something like that, so, like, you hit your limit, and then, like, you also never really need to use them because the combat's very passive. You're, like, rarely in direct danger because you're
Mm.
summoning things, and they're doing it. You don't need to heal up that much in the game, so you don't really need to drink smoothies that much in the game. There's
Is there
also
a limit to
smoothie.
how many smoothies you can carry?
Yeah, it's like 20 or something like that. It's like
Okay.
very short, and so you're usually full up, right? Um, and they have effects that are kind of like increased dive speed, but there's not a lot of verticality in the world necessarily, like when it comes to water, so you never really need to be faster at diving or swimming or things like that. Like it's kind of unnecessary. So what ends up happening in this game is that like so much of the rewards for it filter through this unnecessary smoothie system that like just becomes really really invasive. And again, I know this sounds crazy and I know people are going to be like, this is such a nitpick, but when you find like a super secret cave that you're excited about and you're like, oh man, is there a heart piece in here, and instead you find another 10 stacks of apples, you will feel what I'm talking about in this game. It makes sense in Breath of the Wild. You have those moments, right, where you find like a box full of meat. But when you're in Breath of the Wild's like a survival game. It makes sense to cook all the time. You really need to. And like the effects that are like climb longer make sense because it's a super vertical world or there's a lot of water. This game does not have that, but it has the exact same system and it just doesn't super fit. It sounds like a tiny critique. I swear you'll see it balloons into like, I'm kind of sick of making smoothies in this game. That's my big like I'll die on this hill. The smoothie system in this game is a
So
detriment to it.
it sounds like that it kind of hinders the exploration of this game.
That's one of my problems with it. I really like the exploration just in, again, it feels open. It feels like an open world. There is a lot to do. There's a lot to see. There's a lot of secrets to poke at. I love that there's optional bosses that are like kind of in optional dungeons. That's great. Um, but I definitely found that like a lot of the rewards I was getting, I was hoping that they were going to be like a cool echo. I was hoping they were going to be heart pieces. That stuff is there. A lot of them end up being smoothie ingredients or rupees. Obviously chest full of rupees. Guess what you use the rupees to buy in the game? It's smoothie ingredients for the most part. There's a couple of other things you can buy. There's like some key upgrades that you need money for, and there's a couple of like accessories. Zelda gets like accessories she can equip that have perks, and that part of the game is cool. You get some of those. You can buy some of them. Most of them you find through the world and exploring, but there are a couple at stores. It's a lot of smoothie ingredients when you walk into a shop. It's like, hey, welcome to the Gerudo Desert. We love making peppers here, and we are so excited for you to buy more peppers. Don't go into that cave where you're going to find 20 of them. Instead, buy them here. It's like, I don't need this many peppers. I need 3 in the entire game. Please, please stop. Yeah, it hinders it a little bit. I think like my grand takeaway from it is that like you can feel them trying to put new Zelda in old Zelda. And there's a really concerted effort to combine those two ideas and to say, how do we add player agency to old school Zelda? How do we have it be less of like a linear thing where you go into the dungeon, there's one way to solve this puzzle, you get your small keys, you open the doors. Like you can really feel them trying to combine the systems from Breath of the Wild and revitalize it. And I think that's smart. I think that kind of traditional Zelda needs to be revitalized, especially because indie developers are doing that formula kind of better than Nintendo at this point. When you have games like Tunic coming out, where it's
Hmm.
like, this formula has been done to death, and now indie developers are the one kind of pushing on it and making it more interesting. Uh, I totally get the desire to grow and change that idea, and I think it's really smart. And I love like for all the complaints I'm saying, I love this idea, right? I love the idea of this being a puzzle adventure game. I think that's so smart. I think if they do this again, it'll be even better, and they'll really dial down what to do. But you can just feel those moments where they're taking ideas from Breath of the Wild that don't necessarily make sense in this format. Like
Mm.
things that work in a survival game don't necessarily work in a puzzle game. Like I don't know that you need a ton of cooking, crafting when you're not really taking damage that much in a puzzle game. Um, So I just think it's a matter of like them figuring out what makes sense to keep, what doesn't. This feels very experimental. A lot of games in this last year of the Switch's full lifespan, most likely, feel experimental, right? It feels like, hey, we have all these B developers that are working on kind of passion projects while Monolith Soft and all of our major studios are making the big Switch 2 games.
Hmm.
And I love that. This game kind of feels a lot like Princess Peach Showtime to me, like philosophically, where I'm like, cool, they gave one of their kind of lesser but really liked studios a chance to mess with a new idea. And like there's clearly a great version of this that's going to happen on Switch 2. Grezzo is going to have its big moment. But I think this is really just the start. And there are ideas that will make it into the next game and some that hopefully will be rethought, because I don't think Breath of the Wild is a one-to-one fit for classic Zelda, and I
Hmm.
think they run into that issue a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be all about finding that balance of like, all
Yeah.
right, what elements do work in 2D Zelda?
Yeah.
Speaking of exploration, is it the Void? Is that the other
The
world that
still
you get?
world.
Still
Yeah.
world. Okay,
Yeah.
so is that worth like poking around in, or is it kind of also like just smoothie ingredients being shoveled on you?
So I like the still world a lot. The way it works, it's not quite like a dark world in, Link to the Past. It's specific like puzzle areas that you go to. Basically, you'll find these rifts that are scattered around the world, and when you hop into them, it's basically a little platforming mini game where you have to find three of you have a companion named Try. You go into these places. He's like, my friends are here. Go find them. And you're put in this sort of like twisted, like version of Hyrule, like very like MC Escher painting, like, oh, the trees are on the walls and, you're jumping on them. And those are sort of like cool platforming puzzles, where you are uh, trying to navigate this twisted world, and that's, I think, a lot of the best parts of the game happen there because they are
Hmm.
explicitly puzzle sections, whereas some of the other stuff is like adventure stuff, and there's kind of puzzles but they're kind of not, that's the part that really gets it great, and those are worth doing, and you kind of have to for a lot of them, because there's a little tiny RPG system in the game where you level up, uh, based on like how many still world rifts you clear, and
Oh.
that gives you actually impactful upgrades that lets you like equip more accessories, or that lets you like it reduces the cost of certain summons, so you can like summon more of your like heavy hitter enemies, or it gives you more pips of energy. Those are really great, and I love those sections. And I think like really that's the part of the game that feels most unique and feels most like, oh, this is Echoes of Wisdom, right? This isn't Tears of the Kingdom influence. This isn't Breath of the Wild. This is the idea that makes sense for Echoes of Wisdom and really fits. So yeah, those I really like. Again, it's not a full second world. It's not a dark world. It's just little puzzle sections. But I think they get really visually creative in them, even if they kind of feel the same after a while. You kind of get the idea of them. They're some of the best platforming happens there, and I really definitely check them out if you're jumping on it.
And that the energy, I guess, that you find in there feeds into sword fighter form, correct?
Yeah. So sword fighter form. So there's two different energy things, right? One is your uh pips of energy that are used to summon echoes, and the other thing is energy that goes to sword fighter form. So yeah, there's you can make that a little bit longer through the game, so that you can be in it longer. There's also some smoothies that can let you restore the energy for that. So that's probably a time where you will use smoothies. Uh, but yeah, sword fighter form has its sort of own upgrades that you are unlocking, and you can spend more time in it, and there's that part of it's cool, like it's Zelda. That's where you're getting into traditional like Sword Fighter Link Zelda. But again, you also kind of have moments where you're like, this fight's a pain. Maybe I should just go into Sword Fighter form and play traditional Zelda. And at that point, it's like, you're kind of like running over your own idea a little bit if you have a sort of fallback like, oh, you don't like the puzzle, just play Zelda. Just that's fine. So I'm a little torn on that, but it is, it's sometimes you need a sword. You gotta do it yourself sometimes.
And last thing before we wrap up here, no spoilers or anything, but
Yes.
did you enjoy the story?
Yeah, I do. It has it's not like I would say one of the best Zelda stories by any means. It's a little traditional in some senses, but I like the idea of like the basic premise of it, right, is that rifts open up around Hyrule. Uh, Link and a lot of people in Hyrule get sucked into these rifts, and like it is up to Zelda to save the day. They do a couple of fun things with that narrative, and I also think like there is Zelda's characterization is a little weird because you realize when you play it that like they don't really characterize Link in Zelda games that much. So like Zelda doesn't really get characterized in the same way, right? She's kind of like a silent protagonist. But I do think that the one thing they do that's neat, which is like telling her story through gameplay, is the idea of her making echoes makes a lot of sense and like speaks to her character, right? She's always been the holder of wisdom of the Triforce, so echoes of wisdom. That's where it comes from. So having this gameplay mechanic that's brainier like fits that character, and it's also
Mhm.
like she's the princess of Hyrule. Like obviously, she commands the forces of Hyrule. Like it makes so much sense that she would be like summoning waves of moblins to fight for her and not doing it herself, right? Like that makes a lot of sense, and I think like characterizes her really well. And I think the character gets built up a little bit through there, even though she doesn't necessarily in the story as much. So I like that. I do like that component. I think the story's a little light. It's a little like inessential, but I like some of the directions it goes. I will say, I always say this: if you want a really great Zelda story that is about the character of Zelda and is secretly the best story in a Zelda game, in my opinion, Hyrule Warriors
I
Age of
knew you were
Calamity.
doing that.
It's so good. That story rules, man. And like Zelda's arc in that game is fantastic. Like she's so good in it. She really gets to feel like a character. You get the sense in the game of like she is very like self-conscious about the fact that she's surrounded by all these champions who are powerful, and like Link who has this power, and she's Zelda, and she's like a bookworm. And like the way that they build her power and talk about what her power actually is and like empower her in that game is so good. It's like it truly, everyone keeps saying that Echoes of Wisdom is like the first Zelda game starring Zelda, and that is true. But Age of Calamity is kind of actually the first Zelda game starring Zelda. Like it is the first one at least about her, and
But it's not mainline.
it's not mainline, but man, I like it a lot. And if you skipped it because you were like, oh, Muso game, I played Hyrule Warriors, it didn't have a story, go back and play Age of Calamity. It's so like narratively satisfying.
Is there any indication from now that you've played it, and again, we're avoiding spoilers here,
Of course, yeah.
like, is this the Hyrule from A Link to the Past?
Uh I don't think so. I Zelda timeline, they've kind of given up on. Like, and I think even for this game, they kind of like said as much. I think they were like, we don't care. We don't know where it is in the timeline, and we don't care. It's
That's
just
how
kind of
it's the
Hyrule.
opening scroll.
Yeah, yeah. It gives a Star Wars scroll at the beginning that says like whatever. That's
Look,
all it
we did
says.
that. We did that to satisfy the nerds. We regretted it immediately. This is just a game, guys. Just like
It's just a
have
game.
fun with it, please.
Yeah, it very much feels like the breaking point for Zelda, where they're like, it's just Hyrule, whatever. It's a fun thing to do in Hyrule. Like, shut up, just enjoy it.
That's
I
what, that's what Eiji Aonuma says when you ask him about where this game is in the timeline placement. He just says in complete, perfect English, "Shut up."
yeah, just please shut up. Yeah, no, I don't go too crazy trying to fit it into the timeline. They certainly didn't. It's genuinely just kind of like, it's Grezzo making a new Zelda game, and this is their version of what a Zelda game looks like. It's almost more like, reminds me of like when a comic book artist comes on to, or a comic book writer comes on to a franchise, and it's like, not continuing the story of the mainline run, but it's like their own take on Batman or something. It's almost like that for me, where it's like, this is Grezzo doing Hyrule. This is what Hyrule functions like to them. This is what it looks like to them. This is their version of it. Cool. Breath of the Wild is, Monolith Soft's, Nintendo, I guess Monolith Soft helped on those games. They didn't develop them, right? Version of it. This is Grezzo's version of it. This is what the traditional games will look like. I imagine the sequel that follows this will be in the same lineage, and then we'll kind of have a better picture of like how these games fit into each other. But I don't even think it's connected to Link's Awakening, like as far as I can tell. Like it really is just kind of an island.
There's actually this is another branching point in the timeline, Echoes of Wisdom. It's if Link got sucked into the void, if Link kills Ganon,
Yep.
or if Zelda just decides not to bother.
Yeah,
Those are the three
yeah.
branching points.
Zelda just pieces out. She's like, I don't
Zelda's like,
actually want to do this.
I actually wanted some time apart from Link.
Yeah. We need a timeline where like Zelda quits like the monarchy. She's just like, oh, I actually don't want to do this anymore. This is
Zelda
weird.
installs democracy into Hyrule.
Yeah. She starts her own podcast. She does like a Meghan Markle thing, She's like working for Spotify. Like we need that.
Echoes
one.
of Wisdom would be a very good podcast name.
That they really wasted the title. It could have been a great one.
It could have been a podcast.
It's really like a hawk to him or whatever the hawk toi girl is doing now. Like they really could have done that with Zelda and give her own podcast.
Yeah, Nintendo. Cool. What are you thinking? Not making Zelda the new Hawk Tua girl?
They should put her on her podcast. Put Zelda on Haley Welch's podcast.
Put Zelda on Hawk Tua show. Yes, that would be the best way to promote this.
Yeah.
But Gio, you gave Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom a 3.5 out of 5. And if you want to read Giovanni's review, you can do so on digitaltrends.com. It's available now on Switch. It's a Thursday release of all days. Nintendo's been doing Fridays for the longest time. For a while it was Sundays. Then they transitioned to Fridays. Now they're just putting it out on Thursday, like in the light of day, not having to wait until like midnight Eastern time or anything. It's like, no, It's just available Thursday.
Deeply strange.
Who knows? Yeah. Nintendo, they'll do anything but release it on the same day as other places.
they truly Nintendo do what others don't for good reason.
But we are going to take one final break this episode. And when we return, we'll be doing definitive ranking and getting an eShop gem of the week. We will be right back. We are back, and it's time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since Echoes of Wisdom came out this week and relies as heavily on its gimmick as nearly any Zelda game to date, Giovanni, I want to get your top 5 game-specific Zelda gimmicks. So start at 5, count it down to 1, give me a quick sentence or two about each.
Okay, I will. At number 5, this is like one of those ones that I think is really simple and it's easy to forget about, but The Dark World in A Link to the Past. I think it's like become done so many times that it doesn't even read like a gimmick anymore. But man, when that game came out before everyone was doing Dark World, just genius to have a whole second world and to have a whole like spatial reasoning puzzle of like, how do I kind of get to the area I need to in each? Love that one. Really great one. Stands the test of time. Number 4, I went big here. Echoes of Wisdom. I actually like that system a lot. I think it's a great gimmick. I think it's a really, really great gimmick. I think it plays well. I feel like this will drop down my list if the next game doesn't capitalize on it better. But I think for like a starting gimmick, it's really smart. I really enjoy it, and I threw it at number 4 here. Threw it some love. At number 3, I put down Majora's Mask. I don't know which part of it is the gimmick because there's like 100 gimmicks in it, from like the masks to the time loop. I think I'm saying the time loop though.
Okay.
I love the time loop in that game. I think it's really clever. Really, really, really like it. Just adds like an interesting puzzle element to it, where you kind of have to like figure out how to do everything in one day. Have always loved that game. Really cool one. Number 2. I'm so pumped about this being number 2 on my list because this game doesn't get enough love. Minish Cap. The shrinking in The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. That game is so underappreciated. I was kind of hoping that Grezzo was going to remake that one as their next game. I'm glad they got to do their own thing. I hope they do Minish Cap at some point. The shrinking in that is so good. It's such a smart gameplay mechanic. I love I'm a sucker for a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids thing. Like Astrobot does it too. It's great in that game. Love that one. Love that one. And number 1, maybe the easy answer. I don't know. But Ultra Hand in Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, it's such a smart system that just breaks that game wide open and turns it again into a sort of immersive sim. I loved experimenting around with it. Even from like my first demo with it, I was so kind of like on board with it. It was great. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, great list. We have some overlap, not a ton of overlap, but we got some. Number 5 for me, Majora's Mask time loop. Same reasons you said, like it's fun to try to figure out. It's frustrating, but it's fun in a lot of ways. It's one of those games where I'm like, you should use a guide if you try to play it. Like,
Yes.
that's the way to get the most out of that game, which is not the not commonly what I would say is like, "Oh, follow this guide step by step," but, like, that's
Yeah.
how I played Majora's Mask, and I had a good time with it. Number 4 for me, I'm gonna do the, kind of the turning into a painting in A Link Between Worlds.
Great choice. Yeah.
There's some cool ideas that they were able to capitalize upon it, especially in some of the boss battles, like, they did some really cool stuff with that. I was also tempted to do Low Rule, but that's just, like, kind of a rehash of the
Mm,
Dark World from A Link to the Past.
exactly.
And I already have an alternate dimension,
Ooh.
entry in mind, which is number 3, the Twilight Realm from Twilight Princess.
Yeah, sure. You went with that over the wolf form.
Well, I kinda combine those because when you go to the Twilight Realm, you turn into the wolf form.
That's true. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's
So they
fair
kinda
enough.
go hand in hand, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you can't have one without the other. So yeah, Twilight Realm is number 3 for me. Number 2, time travel in Ocarina of Time.
I thought about putting that on my list too. It's another one of those like underrated ones that feels so foundational now that it's easy to
Yeah.
forget about. But that's a great
But,
call.
like, I remember playing, like, Ocarina of Time for the first time back in 98, 99, whenever I got my hands on it, and being like, "Okay, yeah, I did the 3 dungeons. I'm sure there's gonna be, like, a final boss fight now. Let me go to the temple here, and Ganon's probably gonna be waiting for me." And then it's like, "Oh, Master Sword, cool. Alright, I'm gonna have this for the final fight." And you pull it out, and you're like, "Oh, this is, like, a third of the game."
Yeah, yeah. I just did the tutorial. That's a really
Exactly.
great call. That I thought about putting that on my list. That probably should be
And
on.
then
I love that.
when you emerge from the Temple of Time and, like, Castletown is in ruins and, like, everything is different and just, like, seeing that 7-year gap and, like, what Ganondorf has done in
Oh
the time since he took over, like, that is
man,
such a cool thing.
I know it's not cool to say anymore. People have really like soured on this as a take, but like Ocarina of Time really is still one of the best games of all time. It's still like top three for me. It's
Oh,
phenomenal.
same.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then, number 1, Ultra Hand.
yeah, yeah. It's the best.
It's hard not to. I mean, I one of the honorable mentions that I have, and I debated whether or not this counts, but it
Yeah,
kinda does in the context of the Zelda franchise, and that is Breath of the Wild's open world.
sure. Yeah,
But then
yeah.
it's not game specific anymore because Tears of the Kingdom did it. So that's why I kind of like wavered on it. But I was like, yeah, I mean, that was basically the gimmick of Breath of the Wild was this is the first like true open world Zelda game.
Yeah, yeah, the kind of like a whole format shift. I think that's a good call. The honorable mention on my list that I didn't put in was sailing, just in Wind Waker.
Oh
I
yeah.
love Wind Waker so much, and like the act of sailing, even though it gets tedious and there's like a weird section of the game where you have to go fishing for
Oh, the
parts and do
Triforce
treasure
Hunt.
maps. Terrible, terrible part of an otherwise great game.
Hmm.
I love like the feeling of sailing in that game so much. That was right off my list.
Yeah, I'm with you. That was one that I considered as well, but then the Triforce Hunt really soured me on that one.
Yeah, yeah, that's what took it off my list too.
But Gio, that brings us to our final segment here. It is the eShop Gem of the Week, a chance for you to shout out a game that might not otherwise get some shine on this show. What is your eShop Gem of the Week?
Yeah, my eShop gem of the week is Arcade Paradise. I picked this one for a good reason, which is that there's a great game that just came out that's not available on Switch, sadly, called UFO 50.
Oh,
Fantastic
yeah.
game. Oh God, y'all, if you have a PC or a Steam Deck or something, UFO 50. The idea of that game is that it's like 50 original 8-bit games. And a lot of people I've seen have been saying like, I wish this was on Switch. It's not. But Arcade Paradise is, and I recommend it. It came out like I believe 2 years ago, and the idea of it is that it is you inherit basically a laundromat from your family, and you're running it, and you decide, hey, I could make some money if I turned the back room of this into an arcade. So you kind of like are managing a laundromat while also managing an arcade, and it's this weird like sim where you have to like do the laundry and clean it, but also you have to like take care of the arcade in the back. But also the arcade has like original arcade games that you want to play because they made original cool games for it. But you have to like do that in between doing your other tasks. So you'll like get deep into an arcade game and you'll be getting really into it. And then it's like, I have to change the laundry. Otherwise, I'm not going to make money today. And it just becomes this really neat, like stressful kind of simulation game about balancing your responsibilities with gaming and like, your hobbies and when your hobbies become work.
Oh
It's
boy,
really
can't
yeah,
relate to that.
it's a really relatable game, and I really recommend it. But it's really cool, like, the way that it kind of combines these original 8-bit games that are, like, really fun, or not 8-bit games, they're just kind of all over the place, in that one, but these original arcade games that are really fun, and then contrasting that with sort of, like, having to scrape gum off the toilet seat, like, and that's something you have to do, or you have to, like, take out the trash because your place is getting, like, trashed every day. Really clever little game, uh, and again, if you're kind of looking at UFO 50 as a Switch owner and you're like, I wish that was on Switch, I want to play a bunch of old retro games that are cool. Arcade Paradise has those, and it's really cool. I also think there's a VR version of it now, which is fascinating. I haven't
Oh,
tried that yet,
interesting.
but
Probably
yeah,
not on
I believe.
Switch.
Yeah, it's not on Switch. Maybe it's on the Labo Switch VR headset. I don't know, but
Oh wow, and
uh,
there's a ton of DLC for this game too.
yes, yeah.
So you
Which
can
I haven't
buy
even dug
extra
into that
arcade
much.
cabinets. There's a Dance Dance Revolution style game that you can buy,
It's
and
it's really
pinball.
cool. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's got.
I discovered that I own this game when I went to the eShop
Oh,
page.
really?
I didn't. I guess I bought it at some point. It was probably on sale, and I'd heard good things about it. Maybe if it'd been you tweeting about it,
I
and
might
like
have. Yeah.
it might have been like, oh, I'm going on a trip. I'm going to buy this, and I just never fired it up. But yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's really neat. It's worth playing. Again, just like a really clever management game, and does a really fun, thematic thing with its gameplay. In forcing you to make choices between work and play. I think is really clever.
Well, it's $20, and like you said, it came out on Switch 2 years ago.
Yeah.
UFO 50 is one of those that is like top of my list of like games I wish would come to Switch. It's up there with
Yeah.
Mini Shoot Adventures. That's another one
Oh,
that like
yeah.
those are such no brainer picks for like coming to Switch as long as I can get them like to technically work.
Yeah.
Like I played Mini Shoot Adventures on my Steam Deck, and I was like, this is like quintessential Switch game.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it'll happen eventually, especially for UFO 50. But yeah, I don't. Small studios, small studios
Yeah.
doing ambitious projects. It happens. I expect to see it in an Indie World Direct like next year or something, and be like, oh, thank God, finally.
It would be such a huge missed opportunity for both of those games if they never come to even just consoles in general, but
Yeah.
specifically Switch.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But before we wrap up, I did want to give people a peek behind the curtain of what is happening over on All Things Gamers, which is the $10 Patreon weekly show that covers the entire industry. I had Wesley LeBlanc on, and we talked about our trip to Tokyo to meet with the developers behind the Persona franchise and the upcoming Metaphor Refantasio, including the dinner where the team asked us if we'd be interested in trying some, quote, weird shit, and we obliged. So we also reacted to the biggest news out of the PlayStation State of Play stream. So you can find All Things Gamers over on the $10 tier of the All Things Nintendo Patreon page. But Gio, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Yeah, I'm happy to join you for it. Thank you for having me, and always happy to talk about Zelda and all things Nintendo.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, please throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit the subscribe button. And if you want more All Things Nintendo content, you can join the Patreon paid tiers. That and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any comments or questions in. But you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. Also, you can find me on YouTube and subscribe to that channel. Just search for All Things Nintendo or visit at Brian P. Shea on YouTube. Gio, where can people find you online?
Yeah, you can find my writing about video games on digitaltrends.com. You can find me on social media channels, usually at Mario Prime. I'm still on Twitter, but you can find me on Blue Sky as well there. And I do a podcast about video games called Left Trigger, Right Trigger, if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about games sometimes.
That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode, I just want to take the opportunity to thank the $10 patrons of the All Things Nintendo podcast: Aaron Smith, Elena R., Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Brooke Obscura, Chaps My Ass, Chris Callie, Colton Bredlow, Dan Norman, Derek Sigmund, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jacob Naheen, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph Jury, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Lindsay Hartz, Marshall Thompson, Megan S., Michael Anderson, Nintendo 101, Pat Roberts, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Max 265, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, and Zachary Pliggy. Thank you so much for your contributions and support to this show. You are the reason that I'm able to continue doing this. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.